I found the suicide note in my own handwriting 3 days after the Halloween party. Not because I wrote it, because my grandson-in-law Derek had forged it, practicing my signature and handwriting for what I can only assume was the most horrific plan imaginable. The note was hidden in his bedroom drawer, along with copies of my will, my insurance policies, and a detailed timeline of my declining mental health. At 73 years old, I thought I'd seen everything. I thought I understood the depths of human greed and manipulation. I thought wrong. But let me back up, because the story really starts with a sash. A bright red sash with 3 letters that changed everything. ATM. When I walked into my own house that Halloween night and saw my entire family laughing at a joke that turned me into a banking machine, I thought that was rock bottom. I thought that was the worst betrayal I ever experienced from people I'd loved and supported for decades. I was so naive. Before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from, because what I discovered about my family's plans for me will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. You see, I'd been the family's unofficial safety net for decades. Granddaughter needs college tuition? Grandma Rose has got it covered. Someone's car breaks down? Grandma's checkbook is always ready. Kids need school clothes? Great-grandkids want the latest gadgets? Emergency medical bills? Grandma Rose to the rescue. Every single time. And I never minded. After losing my Harold 5 years ago, after raising 4 children mostly on my own while he worked double shifts at the factory, after scrimping and saving and investing wisely for 40 years, I finally had the means to help my family. It felt good to be needed. It felt good to be useful. It felt good to see my grandchildren's faces light up when Grandma came through once again. But standing there in the October cold, listening to them reduce 7 decades of love and sacrifice to 3 letters on a banking machine, something inside me finally cracked. I pushed open my own front door. The door to the house Harold and I had bought 30 years ago. The house I'd opened to my family out of pure generosity. The scene that greeted me looked like something out of a magazine spread about perfect family celebrations. My living room had been transformed into a Halloween wonderland. Orange and black streamers cascaded from the cathedral ceiling Harold had been so proud of. Carved pumpkins flickered with candlelight on every surface. The antique side tables I'd inherited from my mother. The coffee table Harold had built with his own hands. The dining room table groaned under the weight of homemade treats that my daughter Linda had spent all day preparing in my kitchen. Children in elaborate costumes I paid for, naturally, darted between adults, their laughter pure and innocent. My great-grandson Tommy, dressed as a superhero in a costume that had cost me $80, was showing off his cape to anyone who would watch. It should have been perfect. The culmination of years of dreaming about having a house full of family again, of hearing children's voices echo through these rooms that had been far too quiet since Harold passed. But there, draped across Harold's favorite recliner, the chair I still couldn't bring myself to sit in, was a bright red sash. The kind you'd see at a beauty pageant or a high school graduation, except instead of homecoming queen or class president, this one had 3 letters spelled out in glittering gold. ATM. Mom! My daughter Linda spotted me first, her witch costume complete with the pointed hat that made her look like she was 12 again. There's our hostess! We were just talking about you! I bet you were. The room turned toward me, like a theater audience, and I felt the weight of 20-some pairs of eyes. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, in-laws, and various hangers-on who seemed to materialize whenever there was free food involved. My great-grandson Tommy broke away from the crowd and ran up to hug my legs. "Great-Grandma Rose, look at all the decorations. This is the best party ever." His innocence hit me like a physical blow, because this wasn't about the children. It never was. The little ones saw magic and family and fun. They didn't see the transaction. They didn't see the price tag on Grandma's love. "Hello, sweetheart." I managed to run my fingers through his hair. "Are you having fun?" "The best! Mama said you paid for everything again this year. You're the best great-grandma in the whole world." Out of the mouth of babes. Derek sauntered over, beer in one hand, that cocky smirk on his face that reminded me why I'd never particularly liked him. He was dressed as a pirate, which felt painfully appropriate given how he'd been raiding my bank account for the past 3 years. "Rose, perfect timing, Grandma. We were just saying how we should make this official." He gestured toward the sash with theatrical flair. "What do you think? Truth in advertising, right?" The room erupted in laughter again. Not everyone. I caught my son, Michael, shooting Derek a warning look, and my daughter, Sarah, seemed uncomfortable. But enough people found it hilarious to make the sound bounce off Harold's carefully chosen crown molding. "Come on, try it on," Derek's wife, my granddaughter Jessica, chimed in. She was dressed as a cat, complete with whiskers painted on her cheeks. "It's just a joke, Grandma. We love you for it." Just a joke. At 73 years old, you'd think I'd heard every possible variation of just a joke. You'd think I'd have developed immunity to those 3 little words that people use to justify their cruelty. But somehow, coming from my own granddaughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, whose college tuition I'd paid, whose wedding I'd funded, those words still had the power to cut deep. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved, supported, and sacrificed for. Derek, who'd borrowed $8,000 for his surefire food truck business 2 years ago and had somehow never mentioned paying it back. Jessica, who'd asked me to co-sign her mortgage because her credit was temporarily damaged. My grandson, Kevin, dressed as a zombie, who'd moved in with me for just a few months after his divorce and had been here for over a year without ever offering a dime for utilities or groceries. They were all here, in Harold's house, eating food I'd bought, drinking alcohol I'd paid for, surrounded by decorations I'd purchased and put up myself. And they thought it was funny to reduce me to a banking appliance. A 73-year-old banking appliance. I walked over to Harold's chair and picked up the sash. The material was cheap polyester that would probably give you a rash if you wore it too long. But the letters were professionally done. Someone had actually gone to a store, paid money, and custom ordered this thing specifically to humiliate me. "Whose idea was this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor I could feel starting in my hands. The laughter died down a little. Derek raised his hand like we were in elementary school. "Guilty as charged. But come on, Rose, it's perfect, right? I mean, you're always there when we need you, always ready to help out. It's actually a compliment." A compliment. I could feel heat rising in my cheeks under my carefully applied Halloween makeup. Because yes, I was dressed up too. I'd spent an hour this afternoon transforming myself into a friendly witch, complete with a purple dress I'd ordered online and a pointed hat that made me feel ridiculous. Also, I could fit in at my own party. You know what? I said, looping the sash over my head and adjusting it across my chest. You're absolutely right, Derek. The room relaxed. Crisis averted. Grandma Rose is being a good sport again. Grandma's playing along. Grandma's not going to make this awkward by having feelings about being reduced to her net worth. I am always there when you need me, I continued, smoothing down the sash with hands that had changed diapers, cooked thousands of meals, and signed countless checks. Always available for withdrawal. More chuckles rippled through the crowd. In fact, I said, my voice getting a little stronger, I'm so good at being an ATM that I think it's time I started acting more like one. The first rule of being an ATM, you need proper authorization to make a withdrawal. I excused myself and walked to Harold's old office, the room that had become my command center for managing the increasingly complex web of family financial arrangements. My hands were steadier now as I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder labeled Family Housing Agreements. Inside were 4 identical documents, each signed and notarized 8 months ago. You see, after Harold died, this house became both a blessing and a burden. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a kitchen that could feed an army, and a backyard that had hosted 30 years of family barbecues. It was too much house for one elderly woman, and my family knew that. They also knew that I'd specifically refused to downsize because I wanted to keep hosting family gatherings. But what they didn't know, what I'd never bothered to explain in detail, was why I'd asked Derek, Jessica, Kevin, and my youngest daughter, Carol, to sign what I'd casually referred to as housing agreements when they'd moved in at various points over the past 2 years. The truth was more complicated than they understood. After Derek's food truck business had failed spectacularly, leaving him and Jessica facing foreclosure, I'd offered them my guest wing. After Kevin's divorce had left him financially and emotionally devastated, I'd given him the apartment above the garage that Harold had converted years ago. When Carol's husband had walked out, leaving her with 3 kids and a mountain of debt, I'd welcomed her and the children into the main house. But I'd learned something important during my 7 decades on this planet. People don't value what they get for free, and they don't respect what they don't contribute to. So I'd structured these arrangements carefully. Instead of just letting everyone live here rent-free, which my late husband's generous heart would have demanded, I'd created what I called family contribution agreements. Derek and Jessica paid me $600 a month for a 2-bedroom wing that would rent for at least $1,500 in today's market. Kevin paid $400 for the garage apartment, which was worth at least $1,000. Carol paid $300 for her family's use of 2 bedrooms and the finished basement, an arrangement that would cost her twice that anywhere else. But here's the key. The reduced rates were contingent on what I'd termed family harmony participation. They agreed to help with household maintenance, to contribute to family gatherings, and most importantly, to treat all family members, especially me, with respect and consideration. The agreements explicitly stated that any behavior deemed disrespectful, exploitative, or harmful to family relationships would result in immediate adjustment to fair market rental rates. In other words, treat me like your grandmother, not your personal bank, or pay what everyone else pays for housing. I'd never enforced these clauses, not once in 8 months. I'd let slide the comments about my deep pockets. I'd ignored the assumptions that I'd automatically pay for everything. I'd laughed off the jokes about my bank account and my Social Security checks. Until tonight. I pulled out my phone. Yes, this 73-year-old knows how to use technology. Thank you very much. And took photos of each signed agreement. This wasn't about revenge. This was about respect. And sometimes respect requires consequences. When I returned to the party, the energy had shifted. Someone had started a game of Halloween charades in the living room, and most of the adults had gathered around to watch my great-grandchildren act out various spooky characters. Everything looked normal. Except for the sash I was still wearing. "Mom!" Sarah spotted me first. She was dressed as a fairy godmother, complete with a wand that sparkled when she moved. Of all my children, Sarah was the only one who'd ever asked if my constant giving was sustainable. "I wanted to talk to you about—" "Actually, sweetheart, I need to take care of something first. Mind if we catch up afterwards?" She looked concerned, but nodded. Sarah understood boundaries better than the rest of them. She'd also never asked me for money, never assumed I'd pay for things, and always insisted on contributing to family gatherings. I made my way to the living room where my great-grandson was currently acting out what appeared to be a vampire. The adults were shouting out guesses, taking photos, laughing at his dramatic cape flourishes. It was actually adorable. These children were the light of my life, the reason I'd worked so hard to build something they could inherit, the future I'd invested everything in creating. But you know what wasn't adorable? The credit card statement I'd received yesterday showing a charge for party supplies I never authorized. A charge made with my card that I had foolishly left on the kitchen counter during Derek's last emergency visit. The same visit where he'd apparently memorized my card number. The same statement that showed, among other things, one custom sash with ATM lettering for $37. The little vampire finished his performance to enthusiastic applause and took a bow. The crowd cheered and clapped. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, raising my voice over the celebration. "What a wonderful performance!" More cheers. The child beamed with pride. "You know, I've been thinking about what Derek said earlier about truth in advertising." The room grew quieter, sensing something different in my tone. And I realized he's absolutely right. We should be more honest about things. More transparent about expectations and arrangements. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Which is why I wanted to share something with everyone.
Now I had their complete attention. 8 months ago, when various family members were facing housing difficulties, I offered them places to stay here in Harold's house. But what I didn't mention at the time was that we have actual legal agreements, signed documents with terms and conditions. Derek's face went from flushed with beer to pale with something else entirely. One of the key conditions, and this is spelled out very clearly in black and white, is that the reduced rent rates are contingent on maintaining what we agreed to call family harmony participation, specifically treating all family members, including me, with respect and consideration. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't actually one of their agreements. Those were safely upstairs. This was just a printout of a sample lease I'd found online, but they didn't need to know that. "The thing is," I continued, my voice carrying easily over the silent room, "when you make jokes about me being an ATM, when you use my credit card without permission, when you treat my generosity like an entitlement rather than a gift from someone who loves you, well, that doesn't really qualify as respectful family behavior, does it?" You could have heard a pin drop on Harold's hardwood floors. So, effective immediately, the rental discounts are suspended for 90 days. Derek and Jessica, your rent goes from $600 to $1,500 a month, due on the 1st as always. Kevin, yours goes from $400 to $1,000. Carol, yours goes from $300 to $800. We'll revisit the arrangements after the new year if there's been a meaningful change in behavior. Jessica found her voice first. Grandma, you can't be serious. It was just a joke. There were those words again. Just a joke. The phrase that had been used to dismiss my feelings for 73 years. Jessica, darling, I am absolutely serious. In fact, I'm being more serious about this than I've been about anything since your grandfather's funeral. But $1,500? Derek's voice cracked. Grandma Rose, we don't have that kind of money. I know, sweetheart, which is why the original agreement was such a generous gift. $600 for a private wing in this neighborhood? You couldn't rent a decent apartment for that price. My grandson Kevin stepped forward, his zombie makeup making his confusion look almost comical. Grandma, this isn't fair. We're family. Family doesn't treat family like this. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of Harold's carving knives. You're absolutely right, Kevin. Family doesn't treat family like this. Family doesn't use family members as personal ATMs. Family doesn't charge party supplies to their grandmother's credit card without asking. Family doesn't reduce their 73-year-old grandmother to her bank account balance. I looked around the room at the sea of shocked, uncomfortable, and increasingly angry faces. But here's the thing. I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm simply expecting to be treated with the same respect I have always shown all of you. And until that happens, you'll pay fair market rate for the privilege of living in Harold's house. The silence stretched on until Tommy, still in his superhero costume, tugged on my sash. Great-Grandma Rose, what's an ATM? The innocence of the question cracked something open in the room. Several people started talking at once. Sarah was trying to mediate. Derek was protesting that he'd never agreed to any ridiculous lease terms. Jessica was asking who was going to watch the kids while she worked double shifts to afford the new rent. But I wasn't listening to any of them anymore. Instead, I knelt down, carefully because these old knees don't bend like they used to, and straightened Tommy's little cape. An ATM is a machine that gives you money when you need it. Some people think that's all I am to this family. Tommy scrunched up his face in confusion. But you're not a machine, Great-Grandma. You're the best Great-Grandma ever. You make the best cookies, and you always remember everyone's birthday, and you helped Mama when she was crying. Out of the mouths of babes. That's right, sweetheart. I'm Great-Grandma Rose. I'm a person with feelings and needs, just like everyone else. I'm someone who's lived a long life and learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. I stood back up, slower than I would have liked, and looked around the room again. That's all I've ever wanted to be. Not a bank, not a safety net, not a machine, just Grandma Rose, just family. If you think a 73-year-old woman demanding basic respect from her own family is unreasonable, then you've probably never had someone you love treat you like a human ATM.
The party didn't end immediately after my announcement, but it might as well have. The energy was completely different. Conversations became stilted and uncomfortable. People kept shooting glances in my direction, like they were seeing me for the first time and weren't sure what to make of the view. Derek and Jessica left first, claiming they needed to get their kids home for baths and bedtime. Before they left, Derek pulled me aside into Harold's old study. "This is really messed up, Rose. You're holding housing over our heads because of a stupid joke?" I looked at this man, this boy, really, despite being 35 years old, who'd been living in my house for 2 years and apparently learned nothing about respect or gratitude. "No, Derek, I'm enforcing an agreement we both signed. An agreement that specifically outlined expectations for respectful behavior within this family. We do respect you." "Do you? When's the last time you asked how I was feeling? When's the last time you offered to help with yard work without being asked? When's the last time you said thank you for something without immediately following it up with another request?" Derek opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. We, look, we're grateful, okay? We just don't always know how to show it." "Well," I said, straightening my witch hat, "now you have 90 days to figure it out." Kevin's departure was more dramatic. He stormed around the house, muttering about unfair and family manipulation and emotional blackmail. Before he left, he cornered me in the kitchen while I was wrapping up leftover cake. "This is bullshit, Grandma. You know I can't afford $1,000 a month." "Kevin, sweetheart, what you can't afford is to keep taking advantage of people who love you." "I'm not taking advantage. I live in a converted garage." "A converted garage with full kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and living area that your grandfather spent $15,000 renovating. A garage apartment that includes all utilities, cable, internet, and access to my laundry room. A garage apartment in a neighborhood where similar spaces rent for $1,200 a month minimum." He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You've been getting a steal of a deal, and instead of being grateful, you've been treating me like your personal funding source. When's the last time you contributed groceries? When's the last time you helped with house maintenance? When's the last time you acted like a guest in someone else's home rather than an entitled resident?" Kevin couldn't answer because the truth was written all over his face. He'd never done any of those things. "I'll give you this much," he said finally. "You sure know how to hold a grudge." "This isn't about holding grudges, Kevin. This is about recognizing patterns. And the pattern is that people take advantage of my generosity until I stop them." He left without another word, slamming Harold's carefully maintained front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Carol's reaction was the most heartbreaking. She didn't argue or protest or storm out. She just sat down heavily at my kitchen table and put her head in her hands. "Mom, I don't know what to do. $800 with 3 kids? I barely make ends meet as it is." This was the hardest part. Carol genuinely was struggling. Her ex-husband had disappeared completely, leaving her with no child support and a mountain of debt. She worked 2 part-time jobs and was trying to go back to school to become a nurse. But even in her struggle, she'd fall into the same pattern as the others. "Carol, honey, can I ask you something?" She looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Sure." "In the 10 months you've been living here, how many times have you offered to cook dinner for all of us? How many times have you suggested splitting grocery costs? How many times have you asked what I could do for you rather than what you could do for me?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I'm barely keeping my head above water, Mom. I didn't think. I know you didn't think. That's the problem. You stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource. Even you, Carol, even my own daughter. That's not true.
Isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my health? About whether I'm lonely in this big house? About whether I missed your father? When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about money or logistics or what I could do to make your life easier? Carol started crying in earnest now. I didn't realize. I'm so overwhelmed all the time. I understand that, sweetheart. I really do. But being overwhelmed doesn't excuse you from treating people with basic consideration. I've been overwhelmed too. Managing this house, dealing with your father's estate, figuring out how to live alone for the first time in 50 years. But I still made sure to ask about your children's school projects and remember their favorite snacks and show up for every soccer game. I know you did. So help me understand why you think it's reasonable to expect unlimited support while giving nothing back except stress and financial demands. Carol wiped her eyes with the tissue I handed her. What do you want me to do, Mom? I want you to start seeing me as your mother instead of your safety net. I want you to remember that respect is a two-way street. And I want you to understand that my love for you doesn't obligate me to subsidize disrespectful behavior. The party limped along for another hour after the dramatic exits. Sarah helped me clean up, and we had the conversation I'd been both dreading and needing all evening. That was pretty intense, Mom, she said, scraping leftover chili into storage containers with the efficiency of someone who'd been helping with family gatherings for 40 years. Was it too much? The public announcement? Yeah, it was a lot. But the message? Long overdue. I leaned against the counter where Harold used to sit and drink his morning coffee and really looked at my eldest daughter. Sarah had always been the responsible one, the mediator, the one who tried to keep everyone happy. She'd also never asked me for money, never assumed I'd pay for things, and always brought dishes to family gatherings without being asked. Sarah, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think I'm wrong to expect respect from my own family? She paused in her work and looked at me seriously. Mom, do I think you deserve respect? Absolutely. Do I think Derek and the others have been taking advantage? 100%. Do I think tonight was the right way to handle it? I honestly don't know. Then what would have been the right way? She sighed and set down the container. I don't know that either. You've tried talking to them individually, you've tried subtle hints, you've tried setting gentle boundaries. Nothing worked. So what choice did I have? Maybe none. Maybe this was inevitable. She came over and hugged me, something that had become more precious since Harold died. I just worry about the kids getting caught in the middle. The kids are exactly why I did this, Sarah. What kind of example are we setting if we teach them that grandma's love can be taken for granted, that generosity doesn't require gratitude, that you can treat people however you want as long as they're family? Sarah nodded slowly. You know what? You're right. And I should have said something earlier. I should have called out Derek's behavior months ago. Why didn't you? Same reason you didn't, I guess. It's easier to keep the peace than to rock the boat. Easier to let you handle the problems than to create confrontation. But that left me handling everything alone. Yeah, it did. And I'm sorry for that. After everyone left, I sat alone in Harold's house, still wearing the ATM sash.
The decorations were still up, the jack-o'-lanterns were still flickering, the leftover candy sat in bowls on surfaces throughout the house. It looked like a successful party had happened here, but it didn't feel like celebration. My phone started buzzing with text messages around 10 o'clock. Derek, Jessica, Kevin, and surprisingly several family members who hadn't even been at the party but had apparently heard about the drama. Derek: "This is insane, Rose. Are you really gonna make us homeless over a joke?" Jessica: "Grandma, I have 3 kids. 3 kids. How am I supposed to come up with an extra $900 a month?"
Kevin, thanks for ruining Halloween for everyone. Real classy. My nephew from Derek's side heard about tonight. That was pretty cold, even for you. Even for me? What was that supposed to mean? But then there were other messages too. Sarah: "I love you, Mom. You did what you had to do." My neighbor Dorothy: "Saw some cars leaving early from your party. Hope everything's okay, dear." My friend Margie from book club: "How was the family Halloween thing? You seemed stressed about it last week." Margie. I'd actually forgotten that I'd been dreading tonight. For weeks, every time someone mentioned the party, I'd felt this low-level anxiety. Not excitement about seeing family, not anticipation about a fun celebration. Dread. When had family gatherings become something to endure rather than enjoy? I typed back to Margie: "It was educational." Then I turned off my phone and made myself a cup of Harold's favorite tea. But sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I lay in the bed I'd shared with my husband for 30 years, replaying the evening, questioning every decision, every word, every choice. Had I been too harsh, too public, too dramatic? Or had I been too patient for too long? The thing is, I'd been having conversations with myself about my family's treatment of me for years. Internal dialogues about boundaries and respect and self-worth. I'd practice what I might say if things ever got too bad. I'd rehearse gentle confrontations and firm conversations. But I'd never actually had them. Instead, I just kept giving, kept saying yes, kept swallowing my feelings and opening my checkbook and telling myself that this was what grandmotherly love looked like. Until tonight, when they literally labeled me as a banking appliance, and something inside me finally said enough. People always assume that elderly women are pushovers, that will tolerate anything for the sake of family peace. But we didn't survive 7 decades by being doormats. We learned when to bend and when to break. Tonight, I finally stopped bending. The next morning brought a phone call from my eldest son, Michael, who lived in California and missed most of the family drama by virtue of geography. "Mom, I heard about what happened last night." Of course he had. "Hello, Michael. Can we talk about this?" I looked around my kitchen, still scattered with party cleanup, and sighed. "Of course." "What you did, that was pretty harsh. Derek called me. He's really upset." "I imagine he is." "Mom, it was just a joke. A stupid, thoughtless joke, but still just a joke." There were those words again. Just a joke. The universal excuse for bad behavior. "Michael, let me ask you something. If Derek had made a sign that said, 'Old lady,' and hung it around my neck at the party, would that have been just a joke?" "That's different." "How is it different?" Because calling someone an ATM isn't really an insult. It's more like,
acknowledging how generous you are. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling I'd been getting my whole life whenever someone explained why my feelings were wrong, why my boundaries were unreasonable, why my reactions were disproportionate. Michael, they use my credit card without permission. Derek memorized my card number and charged party supplies without asking. That's not acknowledging generosity. That's theft. Silence on the other end of the line. He what? He charged $137 to my card, including the sash. Mom, that's not okay. No, it's not. But taking away their housing? I'm not taking away their housing, Michael. They can stay. They just have to pay fair market rate if they can't treat me with basic respect. But Mom, they can't afford fair market rate. That's why they needed your help in the first place. And there it was, the trap I'd been living in for years. The same trap Harold had warned me about before he died. Their need trumped my dignity. Their financial situation justified their poor treatment of me. I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to be used. Michael, can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you think I deserve to be treated with respect? Of course you do. Then why are you more upset about me expecting respect than you are about them not giving it? Another long pause. I just think there might have been a better way to handle this. What way? I've been handling it by ignoring it for years. How's that worked out? I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. After we hung up, I made myself coffee in Harold's favorite mug and sat down to really look at my financial situation. Because maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should just accept that this was the price of being the family matriarch. I pulled up my banking app. Yes, this 73-year-old grandmother knows how to use mobile banking, and started scrolling through transactions from the past year. Derek's food truck failure, $8,000. Jessica's mortgage down payment, $15,000. Kevin's divorce attorney, $4,500. Carol's car repair, $2,300. Various grandchildren's school expenses, $3,800. Medical bills for family members, $6,200. Holiday gifts for everyone, $2,100. Home repairs to accommodate everyone, $7,500. Groceries for the household, $4,800. Tonight's party, charged without permission, $137. The total was staggering, over $54,000 in direct financial support in 1 year, not counting the below-market rent I'd been charging. $54,000. That was more than many people made in an entire year. That was a significant chunk of the retirement fund Harold and I had spent 40 years building. And what had I gotten in return? A sash calling me an ATM. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, text messages, and family drama that would have made Harold roll over in his grave. Jessica called Tuesday morning with a new strategy: emotional manipulation. Grandma Rose, please, I'm begging you. The kids are asking why we might have to move. Little Emma drew you a picture yesterday of our family in your house. She doesn't understand why everything has to change. Jessica, sweetheart, nothing has to change except how you treat me. But we do treat you well. Do you? When's the last time you helped with grocery shopping? When's the last time you offered to drive me to a doctor's appointment? When's the last time you asked about my arthritis or my blood pressure or whether I'm lonely since Grandpa died? Silence. When's the last time you acted like a granddaughter instead of a tenant? Look, we're busy with the kids and work and everyone's busy, Jessica. But some people still make time for courtesy and consideration. What do you want from us?
I want you to see me as your grandmother instead of your landlord. I want you to remember that respect is earned, not inherited. And I want you to understand that taking advantage of an elderly woman's generosity isn't cute or clever, it's cruel. Derek tried a different approach. He showed up Wednesday afternoon with flowers from the grocery store and that sheepish expression he'd perfected as a child. Rose, I came to apologize. The sash thing was stupid. I was drunk and trying to be funny, and I hurt your feelings. I looked at this grown man standing on Harold's front porch, holding wilted carnations like a peace offering, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Derek, come in. Let's talk. We sat in Harold's living room, and I studied my grandson-in-law's face. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. Derek, do you know why Harold and I never had much money when we were young? He shook his head. Because we spent everything on other people. Harold's family, my family, anyone who needed help. We gave and gave and gave, and we told ourselves it was love. But it was love. You were helping people. Was it? Because looking back, I'm not sure we were helping anyone. We were enabling them. We were teaching them that they didn't need to be responsible because someone else would always catch them when they fell. Derek shifted uncomfortably. It took us 20 years to figure out that the people we kept helping never learned to help themselves. They just learned to expect rescue. That's not what we're doing, isn't it? Derek, you're 35 years old. You've been living in my house for 2 years. In that time, what have you built for yourself? What have you accomplished? What have you learned? I've been trying to get the business off the ground with my money. What have you built with your own effort, your own resources, your own determination? The silence stretched between us. Harold used to say that the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their weakness. At the time, I thought he was being harsh. Now, I understand he was being wise. So, this is for our own good? Derek's voice had an edge to it. Yes, it is. Because right now, you're learning that disrespecting people has no consequences. You're learning that other people's feelings don't matter as long as you can charm your way out of trouble. You're learning that being sorry is enough, even when you're not actually changing. I stood up and walked to the window where Harold used to watch the sunrise every morning. Derek, I love you. I love Jessica. I love those children with everything I have. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's harm, disguised as kindness. When he left, Derek didn't slam the door. He just walked away looking confused and, maybe for the first time, thoughtful. You know what's funny about getting older? People assume you become softer, more forgiving, more willing to let things slide. But the truth is, you realize how little time you have left, and you stop wasting it on people who don't value it. Thursday brought an unexpected visitor, my sister Margaret, who lived 3 hours away and rarely involved herself in family drama. Rose Marie, she said, using my full name the way she had when we were children, I drove down here to talk some sense into you. Margaret was 2 years older than me and had never let me forget it. She'd also never needed my help, never asked for money, and never hesitated to tell me when she thought I was being foolish. Hello, Margaret. Come in. We sat in the kitchen where Harold and I had made so many plans,
And Margaret got straight to the point. What you did at that party was cruel. I'd been expecting this conversation. Was it? Rose, those people depend on you. They have children. They're struggling. And I've been helping them struggle for years. How's that working out? Margaret frowned. What do you mean? I mean, at what point does helping become enabling? At what point does love become weakness? At what point do we admit that maybe we're not actually helping anyone? You're providing housing for your family. I'm providing below-market housing in exchange for respect and consideration. They're choosing not to hold up their end of the bargain. Margaret studied my face. You've changed, Rose. Since Harold died, you've become harder. Have I? Or have I finally stopped pretending that being a doormat is the same thing as being loving? That's not what you were doing. Wasn't it? Margaret, can I tell you something Harold said to me before he died? She nodded. He said, Rose, you have to stop saving everyone. You're going to give away everything we worked for, and you're not going to save anyone. You're just going to make them weaker. Harold was always brutally honest. He was right, though. Look at Derek, 35 years old and less capable of supporting his family now than he was when I started helping him. Look at Kevin, more dependent, more entitled, more resentful every month. Look at Carol, so used to being rescued that she stopped trying to rescue herself. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. What if you're wrong? What if they really can't afford the higher rent? What if they end up homeless? Then they'll figure out what millions of other people figure out every day, how to stand on their 2 feet. And if they can't? I looked at my sister, this woman who'd raised 4 children without ever asking anyone for help, who'd buried her husband 6 years ago and learned to live alone without falling apart. Margaret, you managed to survive without anyone subsidizing your life. Why do you think they can't? She didn't have an answer for that. Friday brought the most difficult conversation of all. A visit from Carol's middle daughter, my granddaughter, Amy, who was 16 and furious. Grandma, how could you do this to us? She demanded, standing in my living room with all the righteous indignation of adolescence. We might have to move, leave our school, leave our friends, leave everything. This broke my heart more than anything else had, because Amy was innocent in all this. She was a victim of her mother's choices and my enabling. Amy, sweetheart, sit down. Let's talk about this. I don't want to sit down. I want you to fix this. I want things to go back to normal. Normal wasn't working, honey. Normal was fine. We were happy. I looked at this beautiful, angry girl who'd been living in the chaos of her mother's financial instability for years, and I realized something important. Amy, can I ask you something? Do you think it's fair for one person to pay for everything while everyone else just takes? She blinked, clearly not expecting that question. What do you mean? I mean, do you think it's right for I pay for your housing, your food, your clothes, your school supplies, your activities, and everyone else's expenses too, while no one ever says thank you or helps out or even asks how I'm doing? But you're rich. No, sweetheart, I'm not rich. I'm comfortable because your grandfather and I worked hard and saved money for 40 years. But that money isn't unlimited, and it's supposed to last me for the rest of my life. So you're going to make us homeless because you're worried about money?
I'm going to stop enabling your mother's irresponsibility because I'm worried about you. Amy looked confused. What? Honey, your mother is a smart, capable woman, but she's learned that she doesn't have to solve her own problems because Grandma will always fix them. What happens when I'm gone? What happens when there's no one left to rescue you? Mom would figure it out. Would she? Because right now, she's 45 years old and less financially stable than she was at 25. Why do you think that is? Amy couldn't answer because she was starting to see the pattern. Amy, I love you more than life itself, which is exactly why I can't keep rescuing you. Because every time I solve your mother's problems for her, I'm teaching you that you don't need to be responsible for yourself. But what if we really can't afford to stay? Then your mother will have to make some hard choices. She'll have to get a better job or find a smaller place or ask your father for help or apply for assistance. She'll have to do what millions of single mothers do every day. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. It's hard, but hard doesn't mean impossible, and struggling doesn't mean failing. Amy started crying then, and I held her while she sobbed because she was scared and confused, and her world was changing, and none of that was her fault. Grandma, I don't understand why everything has to be so complicated. Because life is complicated, sweetheart. But here's what I've learned in 73 years. The people who love you shouldn't make your life harder, and you shouldn't make theirs harder either. Is that what we were doing? Making your life harder? I thought about how to answer that honestly without destroying her. Yes, honey, you were. Not on purpose and not maliciously, but yes. When people take without giving, when they assume instead of asking, when they demand instead of appreciating, it makes life very hard for the person doing all the giving. She pulled back and looked at me with eyes that were older than her 16 years. I never thought about it like that. Most people don't. They just see what they need, not what it costs the person providing it. What can I do? You can start seeing me as your grandmother instead of your benefactor. You can start appreciating what you have instead of expecting what you want. And you can start helping your mother grow up instead of expecting me to keep rescuing her. Over the weekend, I had time to think, really think, about Harold, about family, about what it means to love someone enough to let them struggle. Harold had grown up poor, one of 8 children in a house with no electricity and sometimes no food. He learned early that survival meant self-reliance, that love was something you earned through your actions, not something you could demand based on blood relation. I'd grown up middle class, the baby of the family, surrounded by people who solved my problems before I even knew I had them. It had taken me decades to understand what Harold knew instinctively, that real love sometimes looks like saying no. When we first got married, I couldn't understand why Harold was so resistant to helping our families financially. He seemed cold, unfeeling, selfish. It wasn't until I watched my siblings never learn to manage money, never develop resilience, never grow beyond their need for rescue, that I began to see his wisdom. Rose, you can't love someone into being responsible. You can only enable them into being helpless. I'd been enabling helplessness for years, disguising it as love.
The turning point came Sunday evening when little Emma, Derek and Jessica's 4-year-old, called me. Grandma Rose, Mommy and Daddy are fighting again about money. My heart broke. I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart. Are you really going to make us leave? Emma, honey, nobody's making you leave, but Mommy and Daddy have to start paying fair rent like everyone else does. What's fair rent? It means paying what something is actually worth instead of getting a special deal. Oh, Mommy says you don't love us anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? The assumption that love meant never having boundaries, never having limits, never expecting anything in return. Emma, I love you and your brothers more than anything in the world. But sometimes when we love someone, we have to help them learn to take care of themselves. Like when Mommy makes me clean my room even though I don't want to. Exactly like that. Okay. I love you, Grandma Rose. I love you too, sweetheart. After I hung up, I sat in Harold's chair and cried, because this was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than burying my husband, harder than raising 4 children, harder than anything I'd faced in 73 years. But it was also the most necessary. Don't let anyone tell you that boundaries are selfish. The most selfish thing you can do is enable someone's dysfunction because it's easier than watching them struggle to grow. Monday morning brought a development I hadn't expected. Kevin knocked on my door at 7 a.m., looking like he hadn't slept. Grandma, I need to talk to you. Of course. Come in. We sat at the kitchen table, and I waited. I've been thinking about what you said, about patterns and taking advantage and all that. I nodded. And the thing is, you're right. I have been treating you like an ATM. We all have. This was progress. I've been angry about it all weekend, trying to figure out how to prove you wrong, but every time I started to make an argument, I realized it just proved your point. How so? Well, I was going to say that I help around the house, but then I realized that I only help when you ask me to, and I usually complain about it. I was going to say that I'm grateful, but then I realized that I never actually expressed that gratitude. Kevin ran his hands through his hair. I was going to say that family should help family, but then I realized that help is supposed to go both ways. It took courage to recognize that. Did it? Because it feels like it took me way too long to see something obvious. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Kevin, the hardest thing about being in a pattern is that you can't see it from the inside. It just feels normal. So what do I do now? What do you want to do? I want to pay the $1,000, not because I have to, but because it's fair. But Grandma, I honestly don't know if I can afford it. This was the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for. The moment when someone in this family finally took responsibility for their choices. Then you have some decisions to make. You can find a way to increase your income, or you can find less expensive housing elsewhere, or you can ask for help from someone other than me. You'd really let me move out? Kevin, I'd be sad to see you go, but I'd also be proud of you for taking control of your life. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I paid the $1,000 but also started contributing in other ways? Like really contributing, taking care of yard work, helping with maintenance, cooking dinner once a week, stuff like that. That sounds like a fair arrangement.
And what if I also started saving money to get my own place? Like treated this as temporary instead of permanent? That sounds like a plan.
Kevin stood up and hugged me, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm really, really sorry. I forgive you, sweetheart. But more importantly, I'm proud of you for choosing to grow up. Tuesday brought a family meeting that I hadn't called, but that everyone seemed to need. Derek, Jessica, Carol, Kevin, Sarah, and Michael all showed up at my house at 6 p.m., looking like they were attending a wake. We've been talking, Sarah began, and we think we need to clear the air about some things. I sat in Harold's chair and waited. Derek spoke first. Rose, I want to apologize. Not just for the sash thing, but for everything. For using your credit card, for taking advantage of your generosity, for treating you like a bank instead of a person. I accept your apology. And I want you to know that Jessica and I have been talking about what we can do differently. We want to contribute more to the household, help with expenses, treat this like a real family arrangement instead of just charity. Jessica nodded. We also want to pay the $1,500. It'll be tight, but we can do it, and we think it's fair. I was surprised by this turn of events. Carol spoke next. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about seeing you as a person instead of a resource. And I realized that I've been so focused on my own problems that I forgot you have problems too. What do you mean? I mean, you're 73 years old and living alone in a big house, managing everyone else's crises while dealing with your own grief and loneliness. And instead of supporting you, we've been adding to your stress. This was not what I had expected to hear. So we want to propose something different, Sarah said. Instead of everyone just paying rent and living separate lives, what if we actually became a family household? Shared expenses, shared responsibilities, shared support. What would that look like? Michael had been quiet, but now he spoke up. It would look like everyone contributing according to their ability. Derek and Jessica paying fair rent, but also handling yard maintenance and house repairs. Carol paying reduced rent, but handling meal planning and cooking. Kevin paying market rate, but managing household finances and maintenance schedules. And all of us, Sarah added, treating this house like our family home instead of your personal charity project. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved and frustrated and enabled for so many years. What about respect? What about boundaries? What about treating me like a person instead of an ATM? That's non-negotiable, Derek said firmly. We all agree that the behavior that led to this situation was unacceptable and won't happen again. And if it does, then whoever does it moves out immediately. No warnings, no second chances. We all agree that you've been more than patient enough. I thought about Harold, about what he would say about this proposal, about whether this was enabling or evolving. Can I think about it? Of course, Sarah said. But Mom, we want you to know that regardless of what you decide about the living arrangements, we're committed to treating you better. That shouldn't be conditional on housing. After everyone left, I sat alone with Harold's photo and had the conversation I'd been needing for months. Well, old man, what do you think? Are they finally learning, or am I being played again? Of course, Harold didn't answer, but I could almost hear his voice. Rose, people can change, but they have to want to change. The question is, do they want to change, or do they just want you to stop expecting change? That was the question, wasn't it?
Wednesday morning, I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. Dr. Martinez, I need help figuring out if I'm being wise or foolish.
We talked for an hour about boundaries and enabling, about love and manipulation, about the difference between helping and harming. "Rose," she said finally, "what does your gut tell you?" "My gut tells me they're scared, really scared. And scared people sometimes learn and sometimes just get better at manipulation. So, how do you tell the difference?" "Actions over time, consistency, change that doesn't depend on consequences." "What would that look like?" "It would look like respect and consideration even when they don't think I'm watching. It would look like gratitude that doesn't come with requests. It would look like taking responsibility without being forced to. And if you don't see those things, then I know they're just managing me instead of changing for me." That evening, I made my decision. I called a family meeting for Thursday night and told them my answer. I'm willing to try a family household arrangement, but with conditions. Everyone leaned forward. "First, this is a 6-month trial. At the end of 6 months, we evaluate how it's working and decide whether to continue." Nods around the room. "Second, everyone pays market rate rent. No discounts, no special deals, no family pricing. If you want to live here, you pay what it's worth." Some uncomfortable shifting, but no arguments. "Third, shared expenses and responsibilities are exactly that, shared. No one person carries the financial burden for everyone else." "That seems fair," Derek said. "Fourth, respect and consideration aren't optional. They're required. One incident of treating me or anyone else in this family with disrespect, and that person moves out immediately." "Define disrespect," Kevin said. "Using someone's resources without permission, making financial assumptions, treating someone's generosity as an entitlement, reducing someone to their utility instead of seeing them as a person." Everyone was quiet. "And finally," I said, "everyone gets one chance to prove this can work. One chance to show that you can live here as responsible adults instead of dependent children. If you can't do that, there won't be a second chance." "But what if someone genuinely makes a mistake?" Carol asked. "Mistakes are different from patterns. A mistake is forgetting to clean up after yourself once. A pattern is never cleaning up after yourself. A mistake is being short on rent 1 month because of an emergency. A pattern is always having an emergency that prevents you from meeting your obligations." I looked around the room at these people who'd been my children and grandchildren and in-laws, who were now becoming something different. Here's what I've learned in 73 years. Love without boundaries destroys relationships. Generosity without limits creates resentment. Kindness without expectations teaches people to take advantage. "So, what do you want from us?" Jessica asked. "I want you to see me as a person who deserves respect, not a resource that exists for your convenience. I want you to understand that my love for you doesn't obligate me to subsidize your poor choices. And I want you to learn that real family relationships are built on mutual consideration, not one-sided giving." Silence stretched through Harold's living room. "Can you do that?" I asked. One by one, they nodded. "Then we'll try."
Here's what I want you to understand. Setting boundaries with family isn't cruel. It's the most loving thing you can do because people don't learn to swim if you never stop rescuing them from drowning. 6 months later, the family household experiment has been a qualified success. Derek and Jessica pay their $1,500 a month on time, contribute to household expenses, and have started a small savings account for their own place. More importantly, Derek asks before using anything that isn't his, says thank you without being prompted, and has stopped making jokes about money entirely. Kevin pays his $1,000, handles all the yard work and household maintenance, and has saved enough for a down payment on his own condo. He's moving out next month, but this time it's because he's ready to be independent, not because he's running away from consequences. Carol has struggled the most, but she's trying. She pays her $800, cooks family dinners 3 nights a week, and has started nursing school. More importantly, she stopped seeing me as her backup plan and started seeing me as her mother. Sarah and Michael have started contributing to household expenses, even though they don't live here, and we've established regular family meetings where everyone has a voice in decisions. But the biggest change is in how they see me. I'm no longer the family ATM. I'm Grandma Rose, a person with feelings and needs and limits. They ask about my health, include me in conversations that aren't about money, and remember that I exist even when they don't need anything. It's not perfect. There's still moments of tension, still times when old patterns try to reassert themselves, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of a family instead of funding one. Last week, Emma drew me a new picture. This one shows our whole family around the dinner table, smiling and talking. At the bottom, in her careful 4-year-old handwriting, she wrote, "My family loves Grandma Rose." Not, "Grandma Rose helps my family," or "Grandma Rose pays for everything." My family loves Grandma Rose. That's all I ever wanted, to be loved for who I am, not what I can provide. Harold would be proud. The truth is, most people never learn to respect what they get for free. But when you start charging for your generosity, when you make people invest in your kindness, they suddenly remember that you're a person worthy of consideration. The Halloween sash is still in my closet, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a reminder of transformation. The night I stopped being an ATM and started being a grandmother again. Because here's what they don't tell you about getting older. You don't have time to waste on people who don't value you. You don't have energy to give to those who only take. And you don't have years left to spend hoping people will change if you just love them enough. Sometimes love means saying yes, but sometimes love means saying no. And sometimes love means making people pay fair market rate for the privilege of being in your life. Comment below if you've ever had to choose between being loved and being respected, because I'm here to tell you that you can have both, but only if you're brave enough to demand both. The house feels different now. It feels like home again, instead of a charity operation. It feels like family instead of a business transaction. And I feel like myself again, not an ATM, not a bank, not a resource, just Rose, just Grandma, just a woman who learned that the most generous thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their weakness. Harold always said that real love makes people better, not more comfortable. He was right about that, too.